Welcome to the Time to Fly podcast. It's time to give your business wings and take flight to achieve more impact, influence, and income with unique perspectives, tools, and tips from successful entrepreneurs and business professionals to help your business fly. Here to educate, encourage, and entertain you with their own unique perspectives and experience, plus sharing anecdotes of growing up as cowgirls. Here's your host, Nikole Haumont.
Welcome to this episode of Time to Fly. Give your business wings. I'm your host, Nikole Haumont, here today interviewing my co-host, Jill Fleming. We're going to ask Jill 10 random questions. Jill, are you ready?
I'm ready.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
So I think the best piece of advice that I've gotten was from my friend Shelly Paulson, and it was after I'd quit my corporate job. And I was feeling really unsure of myself. I'd gotten some really negative feedback from somebody else in the industry. And the piece of advice that she gave me was to be very selective on who I receive feedback from, who I receive opinions from. And that advice has been invaluable for me. And I've learned since then that as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, that everyone has an opinion. Everyone has a belief on how you should do it, or this worked for them, you should do it too. And what I've come to realize is you should absolutely receive feedback from your clients. Your clients are your number one people that you should receive feedback from, and people in your industry that you consider mentors that you want your business to be like theirs. But everything else is just noise. Most people have an opinion on how you should do business because it's worked for them, and you really have to be selective and tune into yourself on what's working for you that may not be working for someone else, or they may not understand it. So when you're looking for feedback from people, make sure you're going to a mentor or somebody else in your industry that has what you want, that they have a thriving business. Because oftentimes opinions and feedback's often negative, and it's very discouraging. So receive constructive feedback from people in your industry or other coaches or people who are where you want to be, and let the rest just be noise. Let it just go right on by as a point of view that you don't have to buy into.
Some very sound advice there, Jill. Question number 2. If you had a time machine, would you go back in time or into the future?
Ooh, that's a good question. You know, I think if I had a time machine, I would go back into the past. I've always thought it would be fun to go back into the 1880s, into the Wild Wild West. And from growing up on a ranch and growing up riding horses, I've always felt like I would be the Annie Oakley of the Wild Wild West. I wouldn't be the girl wearing the petticoats and the skirts. I would have been the one wearing the pants and riding the horses and being the rootin' tootin' cowgirl. So I would probably go back to the 1880s.
Question number 3. You have your own nighttime talk show. Who would be your first guest and why?
If I had my own nighttime talk show, the first guest that I would have would be Reba McEntire. I have admired her since I was a little girl and have just really admired her career and her sound business acumen. She has been in the public eye since she was a teenager all the way into, I think she's in her 60s now. And so just that ability to reinvent yourself and remain relevant through all those years. And selfishly, she's a cowgirl. She got her start singing the national anthem at the National Finals Rodeo in Las Vegas. She grew up on a ranch in Oklahoma. And I just would love to have a conversation with her and get to meet her and hear about all the wisdom that she's gained throughout her journey of being in the public eye.
Question number 4. Before launching your consulting business, what was the most interesting job you've ever had?
I'd say the most interesting job I had was when I was in college. When I was in college, I was working full-time and going to school full-time. And the job that I had, I was working in advertising at RCC Western Stores. I really learned a lot about marketing and advertising and how to catch people's attention. I was an advertising assistant, and got to work with a woman there that was just absolutely brilliant, and learned about ad buys and radio advertising and designing ads to catch people's attention, layout, placement, and how to really market to the Western industry. So that was really the most interesting job I had. I learned so much there while I was in college. And so I felt like I kind of got dual degrees. I was going to college for a business with a minor in finance. And then in my job that I was working, I felt like I also got another major in marketing and advertising. So I felt like it was really well-rounded when I graduated and then moved on to my corporate job.
Question number 5. What is the most unusual food you have ever eaten?
I would say the most unusual food I've eaten, I actually had last year. I made my first trip to Louisiana, and I had never been down south. And I pushed myself to get out of my comfort zone, and I had gator grits and fried green tomatoes while I was in Louisiana. So the most unusual food I probably had was the alligator. I had never tried anything like that. And they're right, it does taste like chicken.
We are going to take a quick sponsor break, and when we come back, we're going to ask Jill some more questions.
This episode is sponsored by the book Freedom to Fly, the visionary leader's guide to unlocking your unique freedom code to confidently create more impact, influence, and income. Get your copy of this best-selling book on Amazon.com.
We are back. Question number 6. What was the last country that you visited outside the United States? What was your experience there?
The last country I visited outside the United States, I've gotten to visit a few. I've been to Jamaica, I've been to Ireland, and I've been to Canada, but the last country I was in was Mexico. In 2012, after I had quit my corporate job, I decided that it would be really awesome to boycott winter, because I was living in Iowa. And as we record this today in Iowa, it is 20 below zero. So just as a reference, that was why I boycotted winter. I had put an ad in this online magazine called the Caretaker Gazette. I had subscribed to the Caretaker Gazette for several years while I was stuck at a desk at my corporate job. It was always kind of my daydream. I would get a list of all these places around the world that you could go do caretaking, and would kind of daydream about that. Well, after I quit my corporate job and launched into entrepreneurship, I realized that I had the flexibility that I could actually boycott winter, because my business was usually really slow in the winter, and situations had rearranged itself for me to be able to be gone. So I put an ad in the Caretaker Gazette that I was looking for someplace warm and picturesque to spend the winter, and that I had a background with animals of growing up on a ranch, that I would be able to take care of them because I have that knowledge. And the next day, I got a response from this couple that had a campground down in Mexico. They invited me to come down and do a work exchange on their campground for the winter. It was really interesting because I almost didn't do it. Because at that time, we were getting so much negative news about how dangerous it was in Mexico, and the cartels are going to shoot you up. And so I almost didn't do it, but I took that leap of faith, and I flew out in January, and they picked me up at the airport. I communicated back and forth with them. And it was funny, as I was flying in, I was like, I hope these people actually show up to pick me up at the airport because I'm going to be in Mexico. I don't speak a lick of Spanish. And thankfully, they did show up and picked me up. There's a Walmart in Puerto Vallarta. And the first thing we did was to go get me some supplies, because our agreement was I would do 4 hours of work a day for them in exchange for room and board. So I would work for 4 hours, and then I'd kind of have the rest of the day to do what I wanted. So we went to Walmart for me to get some food and supplies. And I got a crash course in branding while I was there. So here I am walking into Walmart. It looks like a Walmart. It's laid out like a Walmart, but everything in Walmart was in a different language. And I didn't speak Spanish. So needless to say, I walk in there and I just am instantly overwhelmed. And I had never experienced a panic attack in my life, but I walked in there and it was so different that I had a panic attack. I had to like walk out of the store, catch my breath, put myself back together and be like, okay, Jill, you can figure this out. So I walked back in, and that's where my crash course in branding came in of I didn't know necessarily what the label said, but I recognized the logos. So I knew Coca-Cola, soda, right? You see the pictures of Del Monte, that's vegetables, looking at the pictures, looking at different things. And so I was able to methodically figure it out through branding of what I was aware of in the US to be able to buy groceries. And unfortunately in Mexico, a lot of the labels and the cans and things just have the name on it. They didn't have any pictures. So as a visual person, put pictures on your stuff. So finally, that was my experience of Walmart. The campground is about 2 hours south of Puerto Vallarta. And it's weird roads. We're in this big pickup and we're bouncing over the roads in the middle of the night to this campground out in the middle of nowhere. I am very much thinking to myself, what have I gotten myself into? Oh my gosh. So we finally get to the campground and I am staying in a pickup camper. It is pitch black out. I think we get there finally like 11 o'clock at night and they drop my bags off. I get into the camper. Thankfully there was like a light that I had, but they told me to bring like a headlamp and a flashlight and different things because it's pitch black. There's no electricity there essentially. And here I am out in the middle of nowhere of Mexico going, oh my gosh, what did I just do? So the best thing I could do is I just went to sleep. And so the next morning I woke up and the beautiful thing about this campground, it was about 300 yards from the ocean. And growing up in South Dakota, Nebraska area, working in Iowa, I hadn't really had much experience with the ocean. So I follow the sound of the crashing waves and I walk out and see the waves and the ocean. And I just have this overwhelming sense that that's where I was supposed to be, that I had followed my faith and my guidance to be there. And I ended up being in Mexico for about 3 months. And it was one of the best learning experiences I've ever chosen for myself, of really pushing myself outside my comfort zone to learn something different, to experience a different culture. And it really taught me about pushing yourself outside that comfort zone and not allowing fear to run your life. So I had been in Mexico for about 4 or 5 weeks, and I was kind of getting bored on the campground, to be quite honest, because it really was out in the middle of nowhere. And I had asked the couple I was working for if I could possibly go exploring, because they were going to go to Puerto Vallarta. And they were like, yeah, sure, if you want to go for like a week, and then you can catch a ride back with one of the hotel shuttles. There was a hotel nearby a week from that day. And I was like, okay. But then all of a sudden fear gripped me. Oh, maybe I shouldn't go, right? A single white female, doesn't know much Spanish, traveling around Mexico by herself. Is that really a good idea? And I just had that realization of the question I ask a lot is like, what is the absolute worst case scenario? And the absolute worst case scenario for me is like, you know what? I could die. But then I thought, I'm like, you know what? I am right with my faith. I am happy with where I'm at. And you know what? I'm not going to let fear dictate how I live my life. And so I went and I had a backpack and got dropped off in this town, and I had the most amazing adventure. And so those 5 days really showed me, when you choose faith over fear and you just trust and go, that so much more is possible for you. And that actually kind of dictated for me when I chose to come out to boycott winter in California, to choose that faith and choose that there's something more possible. And that has kind of become a theme that dictates my life.
I remember that winter that you went to Mexico because I was stuck in Iowa enjoying that cold winter. Moving on to question number 7. If you could magically become fluent in any language, what would it be?
You know, I feel like I should say it's Spanish because I lived in Mexico. But the language I would love to become fluent in would be Italian. One of my bucket list places to travel to is Tuscany, Italy. I would love to be fluent in Italian so that I don't have the challenges of communication like I had when I was in Mexico. I think it would be so cool to be fluent in Italian, to be able to converse with the Italians and speak Italiano and be able to do that. So I think that would be pretty fun.
Well, I may have to tag along when you go to Italy.
Go to Tuscany and have some wine.
And pasta. I hear the pasta over there is much better than anything in the U.S.
And some gelato.
Moving on to question number 8. What's the most interesting thing about you that we wouldn't learn from your resume?
I would say one of the most interesting things about me that's not on my resume is about growing up on a ranch and having the agriculture background that I have. From growing up on a ranch, working cattle, being around horses, lots of animals, and just being in the heart of agriculture, I think that really gives me a different perspective of how I look at the world, especially from being a small town ranch girl to being the first person in my family to graduate from college and then going on to working at a Fortune 100 company. There's just a lot of perspective there that is really hard to convey on a resume. And I remember when I was working in corporate America and I would talk to my coworkers about going back to the ranch to see my family and we were going to work cattle. It just kind of blew their mind. They just didn't have any perspective of what that would be like, of being out in wide open spaces and your closest neighbor is like 4 or 5 miles away. And then when being back at the ranch and talking to friends and telling them that we were working on like multi-million-dollar acquisition deals in my corporate job, they just didn't have any perspective. There was just no reference for that. And I think that's one of the things about me that is unique, that I have such a unique perspective from having such unique experiences in my life that a lot of people don't get to have.
Question number 9. Now, I've had the pleasure of listening to Jill while she does this. You're singing karaoke. What song do you pick and why?
You know, one of the funnest songs I like to sing at karaoke is I do love to sing. I am a karaokeer. And my favorite song is Stuck in the Middle with You by Steelers Wheel. It's just a fun, upbeat song. It gets everybody kind of going along, and I have a lot of fun with it. So that's my go-to song for karaoke.
Believe me, you would much rather have Jill sing than me. Question number 10. What is one piece of advice you would give to someone wanting to be an entrepreneur?
One piece of advice that I would give someone that wants to be an entrepreneur is, 1, make sure that you have a safety net. Make sure that you have 6 months, even a year of expenses set aside to be able to support you as you're growing your business. So often I see entrepreneurs start a new business, and I look at like starting a new business as like birthing a baby. And you wouldn't expect a toddler to carry the weight of the world on its shoulders. And so oftentimes we expect a brand new business to carry the weight of all of our expenses and all of these things that we have in our life. And that's why I always encourage, if you're wanting to be an entrepreneur, then start it on the side. Birth that business on the side while you have some other income coming in, or you have some other income set aside, so that you don't have all the pressure of everything on that brand new business. Allow it to grow and allow it to mature without all of that pressure. So for me, when I launched my first business, I did it on the side for 3 years before I went full-time with it. Do a lot of time labor. Maybe you're working at a full-time job and then putting in 4 or 5 hours on your entrepreneurial business, but just allow it that time to grow and mature before you put all the pressure of having to support you and your family.
Well, thank you, Jill, for joining me today to answer some of these fun questions and also giving some great advice along the way. Be sure to join us for our next show of Time to Fly, where we're helping to give your business wings.
A big thank you to this episode's sponsor, Freedom to Fly, the visionary leader's guide to unlocking your unique freedom code to confidently create more impact, influence, and income. Get your copy of this best-selling book on Amazon.com.
Join our fly. Stay informed of all things Time to Fly by subscribing to our newsletter at timetoflypodcast.com. And be sure to tune in to our next show.